Good afternoon, this is Diana again. I'm going to show you how to make some bias tape out of a fat quarter. And it's really easy to do. You can use a fat quarter or you can just use a large piece of fabric. I had made this, I was cutting some things and I wanted to make some bias tape out of this cool looking gingham, excuse me. So I just folded it up from the corner at a 45-degree angle and cut me a big square of it. And this is I'll just show you the difference between a fat quarter and doing it on a piece of fabric. So a fat quarter is 18 by 21 inches, so this was 45 inches fabric. So you can see you're going to get an extra, quite a bit of bias from using a piece of fabric other than a fat quarter. But you can get about 4.5 yards of binding from a fat quarter, and this is how I do it. Now a lot of people just take the fat quarter and open it up and fold it up and cut along the 45 degree. Well, these fat quarters are not cut square, so I always square mine up. First of all, I do press all the creases out because that helps make it lay flat. I get my little pressing board up here. Spritz it with some water so it'll iron out easier. Okay. And then just press it and make it nice and flat. Iron isn't quite hot yet. I made this cool little ironing pad out of a piece of wood I had. That may be another little project I'll show you how to do. Okay. Alrighty. Now, we've got it all pressed. There's my ironing pad. Now, what we're going to do, we know that this is the salvage edge, so that is pretty well straight as it is. But we're going to fold it, meeting those edges. And you can see how much this is off. So if you are going to just go ahead and pull this up like this and cut it for your binding's going to be off. You'll be unhappy with it. You're not going to get a true bias. And so what we'll do is, first I'm going to even this edge up. It's off a little bit also. I'll take my ruler here and lay one of the lines up against the fold here so it'll be straight, and then just cut the edge off of there like that. Okay. That moved on me. Let me move my cutting board there because it moved on me. Okay, now it's straight. Now we're going to straighten this one up. I'm going to put this line on the freshly cut line over here. I know it's straight. And move it up as far as I can. Now, we've got it squared up. Now, we can fold it up on the bias here, meeting these edges. And I'm just going to press that down a little bit. Take my scissors and cut right along that fold. Now you could leave this part on if you would like. I always cut it off. I cut it off. And then you have an extra little piece of fabric that you can do something else with. Okay, now, here comes the tricky part. The cut we just made is on the bias. And there's a crosswise of the fabric, and then there's a lengthwise of the fabric. Your crosswise of the fabric does not stretch. This is the cross grain of the fabric. A lot of people, it's easier to tell on your fabric that's got the selvage edge right here. The selvage is on, I guess your selvage is going to be on your lengthwise. It's your lengthwise. So it does not stretch. But your cross grain does have a little bit of stretch. And then you have your bias that stretches. So we want to make sure that our lengthwise that has no stretch, this is where we're going to make our first seam to make our bias. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm showing you with a fabric, with a pattern, that way you can tell what I'm doing. Then I'm going to take this other piece, and as you can see, here's my cross grain right here like this. And here's my bias. You're going to flip this you don't want to do it like this. You want it to make a little flag type. Go. Now, there we go. Here's my straight of the grain. And you line this up, and you're going to have some little tails right here, and that's about 1/4 of an inch. And then you just pin this edge together like this. Then you'll take it to your machine and sew 1/4 of an inch across here. And then when you open it up, you're going to have this parallelogram where it's going direction like this way. Once you have that sewn, this is what you'll end up with. And I always like to press open this little seam allowance before I mark. There we go, right there. Now what we want to do is take our long ruler and mark 2-inch increments on this piece of fabric, because once it is folded and made your bias strip, it's going to give you a 1-inch bias strip. And if you fold it in half, that's going to give you your 1/2 inch bias tape. I have got a ruler here that's got 45-degree angle marks on it. I'm going to take this and lay it on my fabric like this. I'm going to go down 2 inches and line this mark up with this side of this fabric right on the 45-degree. And then I'm going to take my pin. This is called a friction pin, and it's like a regular ink pen. You can use it as a regular ink pen, but once you touch it with an iron, it will disappear. So if you don't want your markings to disappear, don't touch it with an iron until you're totally finished. What you will do then is mark your fabric, making sure it doesn't shift as you're marking it. And go all the way up your fabric. Once that's done, then you're going to put it together, and sometimes I like to do this. I like to go at the edge. You're going to have all your marks here. I will go take my ruler at 1/4 of an inch and mark right across the edge here. This way, when you go to pin your fabric together, you will already have your 1/4 inch. I'm going to go ahead and mark this, and then I'll come back and show you how to pin it together for sewing. Okay, now I've got it all marked. Now we're going to take this, so we'll be putting it back together, and it will be a tube when you finish it. We're going to take our marks. I'm going to use this side where I have marked the 1/4 inch, and we're going to meet up each mark with the mark over on this side, but we're going to offset it one of our 2-inch strip pieces. So instead of matching it like this, we're going to move it up and match it with the next one, and we'll fold it right sides together, and you want to trim off your little tip here. When I was marking this, it came out almost to 2 inches. I've got a little bit right here, so I've got to match this mark up with this mark. So I'm going to take a pin and put it in my 1/4 inch marking there, and pin it to this other one straight in, straight into my right here, and then I'm going to have to shift this over to meet that mark. This is the tricky part of the whole doing it. Now I've got that in there, and I'm going to pin that right like that. Then I'm going to take another pin and put it in my 1/4 inch right here and go to the next one. And put it in about 1/4 of an inch. And you can see it's not right at the 1/4 of an inch, so we're going to stand it straight up until we've got that meeting just like that, and pin it all the way down. If you want to, you can also mark the 1/4 inch on both ends. It would probably be easier for you to do the first time around. Okay, so you continue pinning all the way across like that. Then you take it to your machine and sew the 1/4 inch all the way down. And when you're finished, where is my finished one? Then when you finish sewing it, you're going to have a tube that looks like this, with a hanging down over here and a hanging down over here. Then you want to take a pair of scissors. I'm going to go ahead and trim this little bit off here so I don't forget. It's just easier for me to lay it on the cutting table and cut that off. I'm trying to cut that little bitty piece off with a pair of scissors, making sure I don't get the rest of my tube caught underneath there. I know there's a lot of videos out there demonstrating basically the same thing I'm doing. Alright, now I've got that trimmed. You just take your scissors. And it would be nice to have this seam flat, but like I said, I use this friction pin, and if I put my iron to it, those marks are going to disappear. So I'm going to have to do it like this. And then you just cut on those lines all the way around. I'm not going to bore you and let you see me cut this, so I'm going to cut and then I'll come back. Okay, now I have got a very long strip of bias fabric. Now we're going to make bias tape out of it. You might want to go back, and now you can press open these little seams here, because going through the bias tape maker makes it a lot easier if those seams are pressed flat. And then you could cut off those little tips. I'm going to show you a few different ways to make your bias tape. If you're doing this for a blanket and you just want to, what they call bias binding, you would just fold it in half and press it in half for your quilt binding. A couple more seams here. This is a lot easier making your continuous bias strip and then just pressing these open and cutting a lot of bias strips and then having to stitch all those little bitty ends together. I've got a little tip here and a tip here. All right, now we're ready to press our bias tape. This is different sizes. You can make different sizes. This is the 1 inch, the 25 millimeter, and then we've got an 18, 12. So you're going to, these make like a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch. You would use 1.5 inch fabric for that, so it'd make it like 3/4 of an inch binding. This is going to make a 1 inch binding, and fold it in half, you'll have a 1/2 inch. What you want to do now is to take your bias strip and push it through the maker here and pull it out the end. You want to pull it back and forth a little bit to get that fabric up and around this little groove, so when it comes out the other end, it's going to fold over on itself. Now you can just fold it out and start ironing just like this. Pull it out a little bit and move it up. You also can turn it over this direction, and then when it comes out, it's folding under there and you're not having little tips. There's another way that I like to do, and it goes really fast. It's easy. I take a long quilting pin and I pin it up and over the strip so it's going freely underneath this pin. Then we have to have something to roll our bias. With my fat quarter and cut it off to about 3.5 inches. Now we've got our binding started here. Yeah, let's see. I do want to move this down just a little bit so I'll have room to put my iron. Then all you have to do is I take my iron and I lay it right on top of my bias right here. And as I'm pulling it out, the weight of the iron, and I pull it out the other end where the pin is, and you just keep doing it like this. It will get a little hot. If it gets a little hot to your fingers, just stop, raise your iron up. And let it cool down a little bit. Now when you're coming to the seams, pull it through the seams very carefully because this will fold over. We want it to go in there standing straight up. So you're going to have to play with it a little bit to make it go through, right like that. Okay, I'm going to finish ironing this portion of it, and I'll be right back and show you how to finish making it into bias tape. Okay, I've got my bias folded, pressed. Now I am going to press it in half so you can use it as regular bias tape. And the way I do it makes it easy and it's quick. And you don't have to stand here and go, oh, okay, this, and then pull it over to it. I use my straight pin again. But this time I'm going to pin it in two places. I'm going to pin it down here. And I'm only giving it as much room as as wide as the tape. And then I'm going to pin right here. And the reason I'm pinning it so far away is, again, I'm going to put my iron on top, and as I pull it through, it's going to fold it in half and press it. And this way, if it's further from here to here, by the time it gets here, it's going to be a little bit cooler, and I won't burn my fingers. So let's start that like that, and see, it just folds it all by itself without really much effort at all. And then once I get a lot of it, some of it done, I will go ahead and start wrapping it on a piece of cardboard, because this way it'll be all finished when you're finished ironing it, and as it cools, it will keep its as it cools, it will keep its shape. So every once in a while I'll stop and roll some of the bias binding on there. I was making an apron and it called for bias, and I went to buy bias, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to buy 2 packages to do what I want to do with this apron, and where I could buy a good 100% cotton fat quarter for 97 cents at Walmart and make about 4.5 yards of bias. And then I have pretty decorative binding bias. You don't find bias already pre-packaged that's got pretty binding. So I would do this all the way to the length of my bias tape, roll it up on my little card, like I said, a fat quarter will make a little over 4 yards of bias tape. See, it goes pretty fast putting through the little pins. I have done it like this for years. Alrighty, all done. So now you have some beautiful bias tape that you can have it in any color to match anything that you're working on, and you use it the same way that you would use any bias binding that you would buy that was pre-packaged. Didn't take very long to make it. I think cutting, ironing, everything to make a deal of bias tape I'm pushing it, may take maybe 30 minutes is all. So here you have it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.